So I'm John Kane, and I welcome you to Let's Talk Native on this Saturday, June 6th, 2020. While this program may not provide a path to spiritual enlightenment, we do encourage and in some cases start conversations. We kind of break the rules here for Native Radio. We don't do prayers or buffalo speeches, and we don't do spirituality shows. We take a tough look at history, oppression, and survival. We talk about culture, the arts, politics, and identity. And we may step on a few toes along the way. But our real goal here is to bring people together by breaking down what separates us. We will take on the false narratives and provide critical thinking to all that heaped upon us. And we do it all right here live from the Cattaraugus territory of the Seneca Nation. So let's talk Native. I want to remind people, though, that our audio does stream live on our website, www.letstalknative.com. And we stream live video of the show via Facebook Live on our Facebook group pages and across many other group pages. We take the audio and we put it up on SoundCloud, which puts it out as a podcast on all your favorite podcast platforms. We take the video and put it up on our YouTube channel, which is Let's Talk Native TV. Again, I recommend that you subscribe to our podcast and to our YouTube channel so you can catch not only our video of our shows, and it is the best viewing of the shows. If you're not catching us live, the best way to view the show is on YouTube because we edit down some of the intro and the outro, so it just makes it more concise, and the video quality is a little bit better. So again, enjoy the program whether you're catching us live or you're catching us later. I'm gonna take it on again. My topic today is assimilation is genocide, and I know I've talked about this issue before, in fact I've talked about a range of issues that come back to this premise. But, I want to start out by saying I'm not going to make any apologies here if I offend anybody. And I'm not going to make any apologies for the voice that I give to this subject. And look, I know there are many people who listen, who watch, who wrestle with their identity. And church plays a role. Military enlistment plays a role. Families of veterans, patriotism to the U.S. plays a role. The idea of being caught in between this, the racial tensions, especially between black and white. Well, where does that leave Native people, brown people, red people, whatever you want to call us? I mean, because we have a whole lot of Native people who not only lean to the right, but they lean to the white. And they want to distance themselves from, from Black Lives Matter, for instance, or, Confederate flag waving, Southerners, or, whatever. So we wrestle with all this stuff. And in this struggle, this personal struggle, this cognitive dissonance that I talk about all the time, we find ourselves losing our distinction. And again, if you and people can believe what they want to believe. You can worship how you want to worship, but make no mistake about it. If you adopt the white man's religion, there's a lot that came with it historically and contemporarily. It does. And there's no denying that. I mean, and look, if that's what you believe, then that's what you believe. Own it. I mean, but if I call it out, don't pretend I'm bullying you or that I'm somehow enraged. I'm not enraged. Look, I have family members who have political views different than mine. I have family members who have religious and spiritual views that are far different than mine. I have friends, some close, some not so close. And some of these close friends I offend on a daily basis because of the position that I take about calling out the doctrine of Christian discovery, calling out the role that the church has played in slavery and genocide and racism. And I don't mean 500 years ago, and I don't mean 200 years ago. I mean today. So, and that doesn't mean that if you are a Christian, that you are a racist. But it means that the faith that you believe in, many of the virtues and all the words of Jesus, the New Testament, Old Testament, they support much of this. And I know people are going to say, oh, no, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. Well, look, I know we can cherry pick and find language in a lot of religious dogma A lot of religious writings, whether it's the Torah, the Quran, the Bible, Old Testament, New Testament. I mean, look, you can find plenty of stuff that, look, that's Westboro Baptist Church. That's how they, came up with their outrageous outlying position on so many things, because they could cherry pick the Bible. But the problem is policy sometimes gets based on this stuff. Look, the fact that Native people were treated less than human, black people were treated less than human, it all begins because we were first regarded as pagans. And then even as the conversion would weigh heavy on us, we would still just be considered converted barbarians. I mean, look, you can believe what you want to believe. You can pray, you can worship, you can love Jesus and all that other stuff. You can do all that stuff. That's just not what I do. I mean, and part of the reason I give voice to these issues, I think that some Native people need to hear that they don't need to be pulled into these camps. They don't need to be pulled into the Republican Party or the Democratic Party or into voting, period. They don't need to be dragged into church. They don't need to be pressured into military service. They don't need to do any of that stuff. And there was a time when that pressure was really heated. Look, there was a time that you could be dead. You could be killed if you didn't worship the way white people wanted you to worship. There was a time that enlisting in the armed forces to kill people who are not enemies of ours was viewed as the best option for life. Well, that's no longer the best option. I mean, it never really was, but we don't need to make those compromises I mean, look, I advocate, the position that Muhammad Ali took. Look, I mean, the draft, enlistment, it's all about the black man or the Native person, being enlisted in the military to kill for the white man, kill the yellow man, kill the Asian people or brown people, whatever, and defend land they stole from Native people. I mean, that's I'm paraphrasing, but that's kind of what the Muhammad Ali. I have no reason to join the U.S. military. But so if you do that, what happens? Well, what happens is every powwow becomes a veterans powwow. Every nation, every Native community has to wrestle with, well, do we take Christian holidays off? How much are we bound by? I mean, look, whether you're talking about, the 2020 AD, year of the Lord, right? I mean, look, it creeps in, and I get it. It creeps in, and we could go by our own calendar if we want to. It'd be confusing, but it's crept in. Hell, we used to use the words we would use to describe the time of day were. It would be a long drawn out expression in our language that would count the hours by the tolling of the church bells. So even the bells ringing in the churches that were being built on our territory became part of how not only did the actual ringing of the bells regiment us towards white man's sense of time, but it even creeps into the language. I mean, when I remember sitting in a class where they were talking about, well, this is how you say the time of day. And the words translated into so many tolls of a church bell. So, I mean, this stuff creeps in. And look, and if it creeps in, it replaces something. It replaces something in who we are, in our identity. Look, there are a whole lot of Native people who firstly identify themselves as veterans or as Christians. Or as Americans, or Canadians even. There's a whole lot that don't, though. So my voice to this subject, and look, is it controversial? Well, it shouldn't be, because there's plenty of the other voices on the other side of this conversation. But my voice is to support those people who do not feel compelled to adopt the white man's religion, who do not feel compelled to vote in their elections or participate in their census or to go down that path. And the reason is because assimilation, and that's what all of this is. I mean, look, we can say it's not, but It is. I mean, assimilation is still genocide. Assimilation, the definition of genocide isn't just killing people, and they did plenty of that to us. And it isn't just taking our land, and they did plenty of that to us. It is creating a condition where we cease to exist as the people we once were, or that we're trying to maintain ourselves. We lose our distinction. That's exactly what assimilation is, by definition. It's to draw you in to to conform. So lose your identity, lose your distinction, and conform. I mean that's what it. I mean that's what it is. And look, I get it. There's a lot of shiny objects in their vessel. There's a lot of wonderful promises made with their, with all of their rhetoric about freedom, with all their rhetoric about everlasting life, with all their rhetoric about righteousness and Jesus loves you and all of this stuff. I mean, Trump will sit up to a microphone and say how much he loves everybody, but do you believe it? I mean, come on. And so where does this assimilation take us? Well, look, I'm going to segue into a story that's just breaking, which is the Mashpee Wampanoag winning their first court challenge to the Trump administration's Interior Department, ripping away their reservation status. They've acquired land, and they've used the fee to trust process to acquire lost land, and they've built out their land holdings with the intent of not only building, clinics and administrative buildings, but ultimately they want to build a casino. Ooh, what a surprise. It's one of the few areas that we can carve out an effective economy or means of public finance. So sure, that's what they were trying to do. The Trump administration just wiped that out. Now, let's be clear here. Trump hates native gaming. He hated it because he was a failure as a casino, owner and operator. I mean, he was brought into congressional hearings where he basically condemned native people who didn't look Indian enough to him. I mean, and that's widely available video. But so this Mashpee decision was to cancel lands that had been previously approved as lands held in trust for the Mashpee. And with that designation, it is considered quote unquote Indian country, native lands. Well, now the Trump administration said no, it's not. And so the challenges to all of this line up with this thing called the 1934 rule, which, and this gets back to this whole idea of assimilation. The whole issue with the 1934, which was the year that the Indian Reorganization Act came out. That's what it's tied to. Because in that Reorganization Act was not only attempt to wipe out native traditional governance, wipe out a lot of native culture, conform us to little constitutional, like U.S. constitutional governments, but it also redefined legally for the United States what they considered a quote-unquote Indian. And that's where they defined that a federally recognized tribe is a tribe, band, or nation of Indians subordinate to the laws of the United States. And it also was an attempt to fix the fact that 10 years prior, in 1924, they declared that all Native people were citizens. We didn't ask for it, but they just made that declaration. And of course, with a proviso that says if nothing in this declaration of U.S. citizenship being imposed upon us would take anything, any of our property, any of our possessions away, which it did. I mean, it gets into income taxes. It gets into any number of things that once the U.S. says you are one of us, it imposes all of their laws upon us. But see, it wasn't done effectively, and they know what, and it was illegal. I mean, it was essentially considered a war crime to denationalize, to strip away somebody's national character and impose another national character upon somebody was considered a war crime. So in 1934, they try to fix it, and they make this definition. Now I don't know where it leaves her. You would think with what they defined as far as their law is concerned, that all Native people were hereby under U.S. jurisdiction. Well, we weren't. And how do I know we weren't? Because today, you not only have to prove that you are under U.S. jurisdiction to be federally recognized in a request for to be federally recognized, and you not only have to prove that you are under U.S. jurisdiction today to reacquire lost land. No, you've got to prove that you are under U.S. jurisdiction in 1934. So that's where the Mashpee are. Now the Mashpee did provide a whole lot of documentation that would suggest that the U.S. had asserted jurisdiction over the Mashpee, which is a little different than saying we had transferred our sovereignty or had submitted to their jurisdiction. But see, with this administration, with the Trump administration, that's where this test is. If you haven't definitively proven to the Interior Department, to the Trump administration, that you had submitted, that you had subjugated yourself to U.S. jurisdiction in 1934. Now, I don't know what kind of documentation is required to do that, but you have to adequately, for the Interior Department's purposes, adequately prove that you were under U.S. jurisdiction, not today, but 90 years ago, 85 years ago, 1934. So this judge ruling in the D.C. federal court basically said that the Mashpee had provided that. So it's a win, but I'm just so troubled by the only way you win, the only way you can gain access and to remedies is by totally submitting to U.S. jurisdiction. I mean, so you have to assimilate so far to maintain distinction. I mean, that's literally what they're saying. They're saying if you want to maintain native land and if you want to maintain, our recognition of you as a native person, you have to assimilate to a place, at least in terms of jurisdiction. I mean, it's a huge compromise. It is a huge problem. And you know what? Our people do it. And why do they do it? Well, because the shiny objects, right? Well, if you do that, then you can have a casino. Well, if you do that, you're one of us now. Yeah, you can claim membership in a tribe, but you're one of us now. You're under our jurisdiction. We have authority over you now. And don't worry, that authority is all about freedom. Yeah, we're seeing a lot of that over the last week or so. So, and look, I know I've talked about this subject before. I've talked about assimilation. I've talked about genocide. I've talked about identity. And it is a common theme. Look, I use it in my intro. But it's so important. And that's why, why I obsess over this is because there are people that are still wrestling with it. I've been battling a few people on Facebook this week over this very subject. They're Lumbee, they're Christians, they're Baptists. Then they want to claim, oh, well, yeah, but all of that bad stuff that those bad Christians, they were all Catholics. The doctrine of Christian discovery was a Catholic thing. Yes, only because the Protestant religion, the church hadn't broken up yet. But trust me, when all those Protestant religions, including Presbyterian and Methodist and Baptist, when all of those things came into being, they still benefited from all of that, all of the Catholic dogma. And when I say the church played a role, promoted slavery and genocide, I don't mean just the Catholic Church. You don't think Southern Baptists, you don't think the Baptist churches were supporting slavery? Even as they got black people to become converted and baptized. A lot of that was about submission. It was about subduing them. You know, give them all these promises that you know that you can claim Jesus will provide and that their faith will provide. But at the same time, I mean, they even altered the Bible that they would give to black people, so it wouldn't include some of the language in there. There was a special Bible produced that had a whole lot of chapters removed, a whole lot of sections removed, just so they could. Yeah, we don't want those Negroes to be uppity. Well, it's the same thing with Native people. I mean, it's the level of racism and absurdity that is involved with not only the church, but the church playing such a big role in becoming a big part of our lives. You know, I mean, you know, whether we put chocolate in a basket at Easter, or you know, or spend a fortune and look for all Native businesses to provide Christmas bonuses, and you know, whether we get involved in all of that commercialization of Christian holidays, that's only part of it. It is a big part of it. It promotes that whole consumerism. But the church does impact our lives all the time. And again, it pulls us away. Look, I'm not a big one on spirituality anyway. I don't look at I don't look at Longhouse as a church. I don't look at being Longhouse as that's my religion. I don't have religion. And so I don't think it's about. It's not because we have a religion that is being wiped out by the church, but it pulls us out of some of our cultural beliefs. So we end up doing things in our lives differently. We submit and we subject, and we blessed are the meek, right? Because they will inherit the earth. We buy into all of this rhetoric, and it impacts us. You know, and then of course, religion and politics get mixed. I mean, that's why you have the evangelical right. So where does that leave people who are Christians? I mean, yeah, look, I know when I start hearing some of these people promote their Christian beliefs, and they want to pretend that it's not, that Christianity doesn't bash gay people and transgender people. That it isn't misogynistic. Look, the language is what the language is. So when you adopt that belief system, you're taking all of that stuff. There's a lot of baggage that goes with it. God and country, right? All of that stuff. So, you know, my concern is how it impacts us when we're dealing with contemporary issues, not just whether we believe in Noah's Ark, but we get into this sense of denial because the church was integral in the promotion, not just of slavery and genocide, but racism. So we have a lot of Native people who want to deny our relationship with black people, for instance. Not only do we have a lot of Native people that are troubled with supporting Black Lives Matter, but there was a lot of race mixing. Even amongst Haudenosaunee, Tuscarora in particular. But not just there. I mean, there's still race mixing happening every day. So we want to deny that we have not just a kinship or mixing with our African, our black brothers and sisters, but many native territories, native peoples that have a clear level of like the Lumbee, like the Tuscarora, like many of the many native peoples have a big component of their ancestry involved having allies and alliances with runaway slaves. And look, on the flip side, we also had native people who were trying to convert not only into the right but into the white, and they were taking slaves. So we have to own some of that history and own who we are today. Now, I'm not saying that just because we have black ancestry that takes away from our native ancestry, but it certainly shouldn't We shouldn't be rejecting it, and we shouldn't be trying to, move ourselves to the right and to the white so we can act like we're racist towards black people. And that's what we see. That's what we're experiencing. So, look, I'm not going to make apologies if to anybody for the views that I express here. And look, I know I've got friends and I've got family who are Christians, who are veterans, who vote, who carry U.S. or Canadian passports, all of that stuff. But just know, all of those things take something from you. I mean, you think it gives you something. Again, the shiny objects. It gives you the right to, to call yourself an American, a patriot, a veteran. You can travel with a U.S. passport. But that means that you can't travel with our own documents because we're not fighting for that stuff. All right, hey, we're at the bottom of this hour. I know I do want to apologize for getting a late start. We're still working on some things here. I think the product's better, but we end up with a couple of glitches here as we kick it off. So we're at about halfway into the show, so we'll take a break and we'll come right back. I got a couple of things to talk about fairly locally here, and of course we'll do a little bit of a COVID update. So we'll be back after this. This is John Kane. This is Let's Talk Native. All right, thanks for coming back. This is John Kane. This is Let's Talk Native. Hey, let me give a shout out to my sponsors because without them, we couldn't do this. And between this show and the show that I do in New York, even though we're doing it here for New York, it would be hard to do it without the support we have from some of our sponsors. So I want to thank Ross and Holly John and the RJE family of businesses. I want to thank the folks at Grand River Enterprises and Native Wholesale Supply. And I want to thank, what did I do?
When you took a drink and we came back.
Oh, yeah. We're laughing at each other, so don't mind us here. But I also want to thank Eric White and ERW Enterprises. And individuals like Cindy and VJ and Steve and Tony and so many other people who will just on occasion drop a check in the mail. It helps. We're upgrading equipment all the time, so that all helps. So I want to thank all of you. I also want to thank my wife for sharing the show across so many other Facebook group pages, and I want to thank all of you who listen, who share the podcast, who share the videos, and all of that. So, all right, a couple of things. It looks like tomorrow, again, according to Worldometers, the world will reach 7 million confirmed cases. And of course, this is confirmed by test or death. And the number of people who have been tested worldwide is still pretty low. I mean, the United States is only about 6%. And by the way, by tomorrow, the United States will reach 2 million confirmed cases. And of course, there are well over 100,000 deaths associated with it. But again, I have to remind people, very limited testing. There are countries that have barely tested a couple of percent. And then there are other countries that, there are about 40 other countries that have tested a higher percentage of their population than the United States. And the United States, again, having tested about 6.2% of their population. And still lead the world with almost, and like I said, by tomorrow, they'll be at 2 million confirmed cases. And, there are 112,000 deaths. We're going to see there have been upticks as in many places, various states, various regions of states, as people are convinced themselves that the worst is over, so now they can loosen up all the restrictions and that kind of stuff. I mean, I don't know what the right answer is or was or should have been, but I do know that as some of the spread may have slowed. It'll probably pick up as people mingle and much more socializing takes place. So there's that. And of course, in the midst of all this stuff, and in the wake of George Floyd's killing at the hands of the Minneapolis police, there's been a constant, an absolute constant level of clashes between urban police departments and people who have pledged their support for justice in the wake of not just George Floyd. Look, there's thousands of people, and there are many names that people have become very familiar with. Some very very recently, but over the last few years, including children that have been killed by cops. But as people went out to protest over the last week, if anything, the cops proved even more how much abuse of force they are responsible for. We've seen it in every city, and see. I mean, Buffalo has a history of this stuff too. I mean, anybody who thinks that, well, Western New York, I mean, again, getting back to some of the Bible thumping, I heard people say, where there's Jesus, there is less crime. Well, I don't know. There's plenty of people advocating Jesus in a lot of these areas, and there's still plenty of violence that's taking place between police and not criminals, but just protesters. Look, we've seen little kids that have been pepper sprayed by cops. We've seen little kids that have been knocked on the ground while their parents were holding them. And look, the imposition of curfews, of course, it's going to be met with resistance. But to suggest that because the clock struck 8 o'clock, that now cops can just level people? And that's what happened in Buffalo. Just last week, in front of City Hall, the special emergency response team of the Buffalo Police Department just knocked this 75-year-old man, just sent him stumbling until he fell and smashed his head. He smashed his head so hard, and I know people who were there, and they said it sounded like a crack when his head hit the pavement or hit the sidewalk. Immediately, blood started pouring out of his ear. Immediately. I mean, this wasn't like just getting a cut in the back of the head. He hit his head so hard, he started hemorrhaging out the ears. And the police just walked by. I mean, they didn't even attend to him. For one thing, once they pushed him, nobody reached out to grab him to see if he was going to fall or prevent his fall. And they didn't need to push him. Look, if they were going to arrest him, they should have just arrested him. You don't need to knock a 75-year-old man, head smashing into the concrete. But that's what happened. And of course, the world saw it. It was, WBFO news and WNED. They videotaped it. And it went out everywhere. And all of the mainstream media, Buffalo finally got its due with the mainstream media. And the two officers who shoved him got suspended without pay. And then was it just today or just yesterday? Either yesterday or today. I think it was yesterday. They were indicted for assault, felony assault, second-degree assault, which is a felony. And so, what do you think happened? So the district attorney, charges them. And look, if anybody else, non-police, if any other person had knocked an old man to the ground and inflicted that level of injury, they would be charged. So why not these guys? I mean, this guy was of no threat to them. He wasn't, he wasn't armed. He wasn't making any threatening gestures. So they knocked the guy down and caused a hemorrhage inside his head, a brain hemorrhage, I guess. So they get charged. First off, almost the entire emergency response team resigned from the unit. So 57, there were about 60 people in this unit. 57 of the Buffalo police officers resigned from the emergency unit in solidarity. I mean, so this gets into the whole cult-like brotherhood that exists amongst police. which is the problem. I mean, and this which defies the whole bad apple. See, it isn't just the two guys who did it. It's every one of those guys who support him. And it doesn't stop there, folks, because when the people had gathered because this indictment was coming down, there were hundreds of Buffalo police officers and Buffalo Fire Department. So even the fire department. So these paid first responders to crisis all support a guy who causes a crisis, who causes, and this wasn't, look, I hate to say this, but the 75-year-old man was white. Not only was he white, but his last name was Gugino, which is a very common Italian name in Western New York. It's a big family in Western New York. I don't know if all Guginos are related. I guess assume that they are somewhat, but this isn't. I mean, Buffalo has a strong Italian presence, and I didn't hear any of the Italian community come out in support of this guy. No, even the mayor, who supported allegedly, and he was on some of these, he was one of the talking heads on some of the mainstream media. Even the mayor who supported the indictment then comes out and says, "Oh yeah, this Gugino character, he was an agitator." Well, where'd you get that information from? The police who knocked him on his ass? The police who are constantly lying? Look, I've got a friend of mine who went through a couple of years trying to fight back against the violence that was perpetrated against him. And he was peacefully protesting the war in Iraq. I mean, so the cops lie. I mean, they've been lying to the mayor for years and previous mayors. But no, there's the mayor standing behind his police department. Yeah, it's like Bill Barr down in Washington D.C. Oh no, we think that the way the militarized police cleared the path so Trump could go pose in front of a church with a Bible in his hand, we think they executed their procedures flawlessly. Well, and that's what the Buffalo Police Department's saying, and of course the police union, of course they're going to support these guys. They support. Anytime a police officer commits a crime, they go to bat for that. And I guess that's their job. I don't know. But it certainly, and I'm a pro-union guy, but it seems to me when you have this level of advocacy, and it's not just about legal defense, it's not just about the union providing its union support for officers in conflict, but they do PR. I mean, it ends up being a whole propaganda effort, public relations effort that the union was behind. These cops who look, the argument that this cop did not intend to inflict this level of harm, it kind of goes out the window if you just knock a guy over. I mean, what do you think is going to happen? I mean, if anybody else had done it, they would be charged. So why not these guys? And of course, for those who are looking for reform of the police departments, it's real easy to get excited about an indictment, but an indictment's not a conviction. This officer in Minneapolis who killed George Floyd, he not only got indicted, but they upped the charge to second-degree murder. And the three other cops who helped him, they got charged with aiding and abetting in second-degree murder, and aiding and abetting in third-degree murder, aiding and abetting in manslaughter, from what I understand. Now, anybody who thinks that these indictments is all we need to hear so we can all pack it in and say, okay, we don't need to go out on the street anymore. Well, they're ignoring the fact that in every city across the United States and in other places, throughout the world, the protests were not just about George Floyd. They were about police aggression. In so many of these other countries, yes, they carried Black Lives Matter signs and they carried George Floyd signs, but they said, we have it too. They all personalized and they all made it a domestic issue. Every city across the world were they didn't just protest because of George. This wasn't about condemning just the United States. It was that. But it wasn't just condemning the United States and the police state that the United States exists in. It was to say, no, we're condemning our own abuse of force that our own police departments are guilty of. So they not only carry, a George Floyd sign, they'll carry a sign of somebody in their community who was killed by their own police or injured or somehow, violently abused by the police. The system is flawed. And if you don't believe the system is flawed, then if you think it's just bad apples, then what the hell were 200 or 300 police officers and firemen stepping up to defend these two guys who are going to get their day in court, their due process, and I'm going to tell you, they aren't going to get convicted, and yet that's this cult-like brotherhood, this blue line, this blue code that exists for police. That's the system that's flawed. The fact that you can have a lieutenant walking right down the street with, a street patrol officer, and not do or say or even notice when that patrol officer knocks, a 120-pound girl on her ass, smashing her head on the pavement. When you see how often, and in every one of these instances, that the police have flat out all come together and supported each other, no matter what the level of violence was. I didn't hear a single police chief condemn the use of rubber bullets in outside of the explicit way they're supposed to be used, shooting people in the face with a rubber bullet. I haven't heard any one of. There are a couple of officers in Atlanta that are facing charges for what they did to somebody who just happened to be in a car. They vandalized his car, and they tased him and they beat him. All of this stuff. It's just, but for the most part, and nobody stopped him at the time. Which is part of the issue. Nobody stops anybody from killing somebody. Nobody stops a fellow police officer. And look, I know police. I know people who are police officers. And this is the character flaw. This is the system. I don't know if I personally know any police officer that would restrain another police officer who was hurting somebody. I wish I could say I did, but I don't. And that's why when we say, ACAB, all cops are bastards or all cops are bad, it's, you don't have to be the person kneeling on somebody's neck. You just have to sit there and protect him from somebody interfering with that. If you're doing that, yeah, I'm sorry. You're part of the problem. But Buffalo demonstrated so clearly not only the abuse of force, but the rallying cry amongst police officers and fire department to defend their brothers when they've committed one of these horrendous crimes. And look, and Buffalo has a disproportionate amount of arrests against black people. They have a disproportionate amount of black people in their jails, in their prisons. And and Byron Brown, look, you're just playing Uncle Tom. You're just playing Uncle Tom. I'm just gonna say it. It's fine for you to get out there and support the DA in indicting these guys, but damn well you're hoping that they're acquitted, and you want to defend your police departments. And look, and that's what I say. Where are the mayors? Where are all the elected officials? Yeah, it's fine to put all the pressure on the district attorneys for prosecuting these guys, but most of them aren't. The vast majority of violence that we've seen over the last week across YouTube, across Facebook, across the news channels, across cable TV, Nobody's taking their names and going to charge those cops. If anything, there's some suggestion that if you were a protester, they're doing everything they can, which is more difficult with wearing a COVID mask, to use facial recognition to come at you later. Look, we need to keep it up. And I don't say this. I'm not saying this as an American. I'm not. As a Native person, again, I'm going to say it again. Native people are killed at a higher rate proportional to our, to our population than anybody else, except in one age demographic from 16 to 22. That's the only place where a black 16 to 22-year-old has a higher chance of being killed than a Native person, proportional to our population. But again, Native people, many of us don't live in urban environments. Many of the deaths that happen to Native people are happening in rural areas that don't have the mainstream media rushing out to cover it. We rarely, unless somebody's a celebrity, unless there's or it's in a city, like when Savannah Greywind was murdered and had her baby cut out of her, out of her womb. Unless it's something sensational like that, there's no coverage. That's why we have missing and murdered Indigenous women. Because who's going to report on it? Oh, yeah, news will run a story on it every once in a while. But do they do it? Are they going to count every day that another Native woman is missing or is murdered or is found murdered or found dead? No, of course not. Of course they're not going to do that. Why? Because it's not happening in New York City. It's not happening. Look, these murders may end up happening, because some of these women are being pumped into the sex slave trade. But they're women. These are women who are turning up missing from some remote reservation. So the mainstream media doesn't have to care about that. And our young men, or our men, not just young men, again, all age demographics, a Native man has a better chance of being killed by a police officer than anybody else. Much higher percentage than white, and a slightly higher percentage than black people. And again, only in that 16 to 22-year-old age group does the amount of black men killed per million of their population. That's usually the standard they use. So a percentage of their population. That's the only place where their percentage surpasses Natives' deaths by cop. So that's why this concerns me. That's why we need to oppose the systemic failures of police departments, the systemic failures of the Justice Department, or just us, as I guess white people call it. Because there is no justice. If you're a person of color, you have to worry every time a cop stops you. You have to worry about how you carry yourself with police officers. Because they have the right. They have the protection. They don't have the right. They don't really have a legal right. But they have case law, Supreme Court rulings. They have certain things that have been established that give them, put them in a situation where they're not held accountable. Somebody asked me about, somebody who shot a podcast talking about the biggest problem is not racism. It's not COVID-19. It's not poverty. It's not this. It's personal responsibility. Yeah, well, then when do police officers, when do politicians, when do they get held responsible? When are they held accountable for their actions? And again, if you're going to tell people that you need to go out and vote and you need to put another person into office to do what? I'll tell you what you're doing is you're giving up your responsibility to somebody else. Saying, no, I voted you in. And that's your job now. You can't promote personal responsibility and then on the second breath saying, but you need to run for office, you need to vote, people who are going to be more responsible? So to take your responsibility away, look, I have a conversation about leadership, right? And people say, well, there's no leadership. Well, you know where strong leadership is needed? When you have weak people. Otherwise, you just need the people to lead en masse. I mean, you need people that are willing to step up, not looking for somebody to give them orders, like police officers or soldiers. They need leaders. And you know what? They're so-called leaders. They're captains, they're lieutenants, they're chiefs, police chiefs. They'll back them up because they're doing what those guys tell them to do, and that includes the mayors. So I don't want to give somebody else responsibility. I want everybody to accept responsibility. Everybody, police officers. But I'm not going to cast a ballot to put another agent of my oppression in office, to give somebody else authority. No, there's enough of them out there already. And don't tell me that I need to support a native candidate, because as far as I'm concerned, that person just jumped ship. They just joined the positions of power. They just joined the other side. So, I mean, it kind of brings me back to the original subject about genocide and about assimilation. I don't want to be a part of that system. I don't want to subject myself to their legislative authority, to their judicial authority, to their jurisdiction. And I damn sure don't want to claim any of these 45 Ranadagayas that have sat in that office, including and perhaps especially the moron that's in the White House today. So, look, and if any of this stuff offends you, and it may, because some of you are picking and choosing which parts of American culture you want to try on next. Their church, their military, maybe their police departments. I don't know. And so what I'm saying, I hope it makes you think. And look, if you make a decision, an informed decision, then at least you gave it the time. You applied some critical thinking to what you're doing. Just don't be lured in by the shiny objects and the false promises. Native people have been promised many things over the years. And the only promise that was ever kept was the promise when they said they were going to take our land. This is John Kane. This is Let's Talk Native. We'll see you back here on Tuesday.